down. Welcome, everybody. Julia, let's start with you.
Well, Kelly, so many different questions still unanswered. The first one that I have is, what is it that Elon Musk wants to do with Twitter? He's talked a lot in the past about his interest in making sure that Twitter is an open, free speech, global town square. He's also criticized Twitter's reliance on advertising. The challenge there is that Twitter is entirely reliant on advertising. It's over 90% of its revenue. And even as it's working to build up these other revenue models, such as subscription, it will be many years before that those could really replace that reliance on advertising. And I just have to say, Kelly, Elon Musk is expected to speak at the TED conference any minute now. We're monitoring that. That's going to be live streamed, and we're going to be watching it and bringing you the latest on that. And I would expect a lot of news to come out of this Twitter CEO meeting with Twitter employees that is reportedly scheduled for 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific today. We can probably expect a lot of leaks to come out of that meeting.
Julia, what do we know about the TED Talk?
The TED Talk has been scheduled for a while. Elon Musk has been on that schedule for a while. He actually was supposed to start speaking about 15 minutes ago, but as we well know, conferences often run late. So he's set to be up next, and we'll see what he addresses. I would assume, with these TED Talks, people usually plan them months in advance. I would assume that he will pivot away from whatever he had originally planned to discuss, to talk about the news of the day. So maybe he'll respond to those shareholders such as Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, who said that they do not think the board should accept this offer. And maybe he'll explain what his vision is for the company.
Wouldn't that be nice? Julia, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you. And we'll turn to Robert Frank. Here's the tweet from Prince Al-Walid, by the way. He says, I don't believe the proposed offer by Elon Musk comes close to the intrinsic value of Twitter, given its growth prospects. I reject this offer. Robert, if Musk did move forward, what is it, $46 billion? Is it cash? How would he pay for it?
It's about 40, 43. He's already got a couple billion in the company, so probably closer to 40. And look, he's worth $260 billion. So he could actually write a $40 billion check and still be worth $35 billion more than Jeff Bezos. The problem is that all that wealth is illiquid. So let's take a look. If he sold Tesla stock to pay that bill, that would be 4% or 40 million shares that would get dumped onto the market that would just crater Tesla shares. We already see those shares down over 3% today on those fears. He could maybe borrow against his shares in Tesla as well as SpaceX. Now, that would be maybe still a lot of borrowing. He has at one time way back borrowed over a third of his shares in Tesla to fund his lifestyle. Unlikely at this point that he would do that, or maybe that a bank would be able to willing to lend him that much. The more likely scenario is that he gets financing. Now, the question with financing is whoever invests alongside Elon would want one of two things. They're either doing this for ideological reasons or they're going to do it for economic reasons. He's good friends with, let's say, Peter Thiel, Larry Ellison. These are other billionaire pals who might invest alongside him. But it's unclear that, let's say, a private equity firm like Silver Lake would come in purely on the economics, because it's unclear that Elon has an economic plan forward for this company that would give anyone an acceptable rate of return as a lender. So even though he is the richest man, the financing is unclear here.
And absolutely raises the question, Sarah, of who might be a partner for him. What about the traditional media world and the traditional media landscape? And I mean, probably the biggest debate making the rounds today is about, how and whether Twitter should be treated as, a public utility. Is it a monopoly? Should it be regulated or not? Should it be hands-off? Should it be more hands-on? Should they curate content the way they've been curating it? Sarah, what do you make of all of these questions?
Yeah, I think a traditional media company is going to be tough. As you know, Disney kicked the tires on it, but Bob Iger at the time ultimately decided that it would be too risky to bring on a platform like Twitter. I think other traditional media companies are going to have the same type of thinking. But what you could expect is that if the board rejects this offer, it could start to spur the tires on conversations on whether Twitter is in play. We know that Apple, Google, Salesforce, other big tech companies have looked at Twitter. Now, the question becomes, to your point, Kelly, what is the fate of Twitter if it comes private? Now, obviously, if it gets bought by a publicly traded company, that's different. But if it goes private, is there going to be more or less pressure on this company to address things like misinformation versus addressing things like product innovation? We have not heard at all Elon Musk talk much about the product roadmap But what we do know is that he wants to make it a platform for more free speech. Obviously, there's concerns. When you start to broaden speech on a platform like this, you run into brand safety risk. That then challenges the advertising model for the company. So it's unclear where all of this goes. What we're hoping is we get some sort of clarity from Elon Musk in the next few minutes, and that might change where the stock moves.
Jim, what jumps out to you, having watched a number of these takeover and boardroom dramas, about the state of play here? What do you think we should be watching for in terms of understanding what direction this might go next?
Well, I think we'll soon hear some key board communications, but I'm sure among the other things they are considering is first of all, is this a credible bid? And in support of that, they're going to want to see a financing plan. They're going to want to see a credible advisor. Remember when Musk, shot off his, attempt to take Tesla private, it turned out he had no real planning. He had no investment bankers. He had no financing plan. It was all just something he did on impulse. Now, are we dealing with a situation like that again? If so, the board has an easy out. Secondly, they can say valuation. They can use, discounted cash flow models and say, as some holders already have, that the bid is too low. But, that still suggests, he raises that they would do it. I think that the other really interesting issue for the board, are there going to be big regulatory issues here? And I think there will be. Again, because of these issues, Twitter is a quasi-public utility. It involves free speech. And when you have a private buyer taking over who may have their own agendas, he's saying, I want to promote free speech. Does that mean adding more hate speech? Does that mean inviting former President Trump back on there? There are a host of issues there that both the Justice Department and Congress may be interested in. The Justice Department is trying to block the Simon & Schuster takeover by Random House on the grounds it would hurt authors. That's a very unconventional antitrust doctrine. They could here move and say, well, we're here to protect the users of Twitter because we do not want a private owner like this. Finally, I'll just say, in terms of it being in play, I don't think it's going to be traditional media companies lining up here, but what about other eccentric billionaires? Musk is not the only one who could afford to buy this company. And there are some of them out there who are way more political than he is, who might want to control the content more. And I think that, again, is going to worry regulators.
We're getting some reaction from Mark Andreessen. Julia, what's he saying?
Mark Andreessen just tweeted out, Elon's proposed takeover of Twitter is a profound threat to unfree speech. So a bit of a double negative there, saying that ultimately he thinks that it would be enabling free speech, I believe, if I'm reading that double negative correctly. But I think it's interesting to contrast that with a tweet earlier today from Fred Wilson, who was an early investor in Twitter, a VC who was an early investor in Twitter. He said Twitter is too important to be owned and controlled by a single person. The opposite should be happening. Twitter should be decentralized as a protocol that powers an ecosystem of communication products and services. Kelly?
Which, again, kind of goes back to the larger question of what it's going to look like and how it's going to evolve. Brent Thill, as the analyst in the room here, when you hear that from Mark Andreessen, does it make you nervous or excited, or what do you think?
I don't think the deal is going to get done at 54.20. It's going to take 60. You can see in the market reaction what investors are thinking, and ultimately, we think that this doesn't make sense. Clearly, I don't think a professional board is going to endorse that number for various reasons. And I think when you look at the board, right, you look at Brett Taylor, who has ties to Salesforce. We know Salesforce.com was interested in buying this. I'm not saying they're going to do it. But as you said, there are other wealthy individuals that could consider this and tie it together as a consortium. On the other side, you've got Egon Durbin, who's one of the top finance leaders in our industry and has a tremendous amount of contacts, so they could come up with another game plan as well. So I don't think this happens. And if it happens, it's going to have to be at a higher level. We'll see if he walks away, if he's serious about selling all his stock. Again, I think this, to me, sounds like there's going to be a lot more debate going on for many weeks on this topic. It's not done.
Brent, why do you think it is that if something in the 60s would be more palatable to get a deal done, no matter who's the bidder, that the shares are still trading at 46 today?
Well, I think ultimately we don't know if someone comes, that's what it's going to take. But that would put it, again, at low 20 EBITDA and a 6 times forward rev number. Most of tech deals that have been getting done in 2022 start with one of the famous convenience stores, 7-Eleven, 7 to 11 times revenue. So we're way outside the range of that. And I agree. Look, it's not a software company with recurring revenue, but certainly I think most investors that are watching tech, including our team, would suggest this undervalues the company. And again, the 420 is absurd. No board in America is going to accept that.
Jim Stewart, what would you add to that?
Well, yeah, I agree. Although I think the valuation. I think first of all, the reason the stock is trading there is investors don't think this is going to happen, and for a lot of reasons. But putting that aside, even if you up the number to say 60 or even go to 80, these are not. The issue here is not the number. It is the nature of Twitter, and the regulators are going to have to come to terms with what kind of company this is. This is a platform that has some kind of sort of natural monopoly behind it, but it hasn't really been able to monetize it the way, say, Facebook or Google has been able to do with their very highly concentrated market. So I don't think the share price offer is really ultimately be the issue. There are bigger issues at play here.
Sarah Fisher, a final word here.
I think what you just mentioned about the recurring revenue is where Twitter wants to go, which is why I do think this bid is undervalued. Twitter is pushing into subscriptions, and in particular, enterprise subscriptions. If you take a look at what they're doing with TweetDeck, even if that revenue isn't there now, that's the plan. And I think that investors probably think that should be baked into the price. And that's why I think the board has some leverage here to say that that price that Elon Musk put out today is just too low.
And actually, I should ask Robert before we go, since you've watched so many deals unfold over the years and you know the numbers here in terms of what Musk would have to do, what's your gut feel for how likely this is to come to a consummation at this point?
I have no idea. I'm not even sure Elon Musk knows at this point. I mean, I think the overriding question here is, do we want the richest man in the world to own the public square? And as a student of history of wealth, you look back at the 1900s when the wealthy owned the newspapers, and they weren't exactly standards of objectivity and facts. And I just think the question is, what is his goal? Does he really want free speech, or does he have an ideological reason to do this? I think we should all be wary of when the richest person in the world wants to control something that has such a huge voice in democracies and the world.
All right. And meanwhile, the share price fluctuating around as investors have to weigh the likelihood of this in the direction it ultimately goes. Thank you very much, guys, everybody, for joining us today.
Sure.
We really appreciate it. Julia Borson, Robert Frank, Sarah Fisher, Jim Stewart, and Brent Thill. And we'll be monitoring, as you heard from Julia a moment ago, Elon's TED Talk that may be going down any moment now. Any highlights, of course, we will bring you as they roll in. Meanwhile, coming up, it's the